I mean, of course, Lewis is cheesed off with the situation because deep down inside, he lost the Drivers' Championship last year for no reason whatsoever, because stupid things were done against the rule book on the last lap of the race. And I still think Mercedes should have fought that much harder than they did. Red Bull would never in a million years have thought of signing George Russell, even if he was available, and put him alongside Max Verstappen. But Mercedes did. So that's what's happened. If I was now drafted in as team principal at Mercedes, I would say, George, here's the contract. It's in two pieces now, mate. If you want to keep driving, no problem, but sign on the dotted line here. You will never finish in front of Lewis Hamilton. Sorry.
Wow.
Gilles was just a great guy. Lovely guy. Lovely guy. I really miss him. And I've really missed him every year since he passed. And not every year, every day. There hasn't been a day gone past when I haven't thought about him and missed him.
Mr. Windsor, how are you doing, sir? You all right?
I'm very good. Good to see you again.
Good. No, good to see you. Thank you for coming on the channel again. My subscribers will stop badgering me and harassing me for once, for a couple of months, maybe at least. Can we talk F1? How did you enjoy the Miami Grand Prix? Was it too much circus and not enough circuit for you, or did you enjoy it? Because I'm hearing loads of conflicting opinions on it. Most of my mates think it was a 5 out of 10 Grand Prix, not very exciting. But as a purist, I'm guessing that you will.
I thought it was a very good race. I thought there was a lot of different pressure points in the race and a lot of great things. I mean, Charles' start was fabulous. Max's first corner was fabulous. I thought Max's opening phase when he was looking after the tires was incredibly measured. I mean, Charles was on the limit kind of what the car could do all day. And as I kind of predicted on Saturday when I was pointing out how little running Ferrari did on the medium tire, or indeed the hard, with fuel, and that could hurt them in the race. That's kind of what happened. So
absolutely,
it was interesting to see the race unfolding that way. The question was how Max was going to play that. And I think he played it really well. I mean, obviously it was really tense towards the end. I think on the hard tire with not much to lose, on the medium tire, no, on the hard tire, on the hard tire, not much to lose at the end of the race. It was always going to be very close with Charles, particularly as he was going to be in the DRS. And that was a difficult moment for Max, but he was really good under pressure. I mean, that was as good as I've seen Max drive, actually. And I thought Charles gave it everything, but he was kind of let down by not having enough. You know, he couldn't abuse the tires on the medium, and that was a problem. You know, Ferrari should have done a bit more homework on that. And let's face it, they had more running time with the car than Max had. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see if Ferrari learned from that or not. Absolutely. But I thought overall it was a very good event. You know, I'm assuming that Liberty have put up quite a lot of money to make this race happen. And how much, if you take the Bernie model of how Formula One existed, which was to get everybody else to pay all the bills, and Formula One turns up and takes the money, basically. It's kind of not what's happening at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how it pans out long term. But it was great. I didn't think it was too much show, but then again, I never really get involved with all that. I kind of watch the world feed. I don't listen to much of what's going on, and I just watch the racing, and that's it, really.
Fair, and I think that's probably the best way to ingest it, if you're honest, Peter. Speak to your. I watched a video on Max and his ability to handle pressure. There's been a raft of videos on YouTube, potentially a tad premature, saying is Max the greatest ever. However, Peter will say, you put the point that you made on your preview video that Max didn't have a lot of time in the car, nor could he, by extension, have accrued a lot of data. Again, brand new track. That is an absolutely incredible drive, right, Peter? Like, I don't know. Am I getting a bit ahead of myself, or am I right to give him his flowers?
I think anyone who says that on the basis of Miami, he's suddenly become a great driver hasn't been watching Formula One for the last 5 years, because Lewis Hamilton's been brilliant, as has Charles Leclerc, even when his car hasn't been competitive. I mean, Charles is not driving any differently now to when the Ferrari was uncompetitive any more than Max was when the Red Bull wasn't winning races. But he has the confidence that comes from having a really nice chassis that's drivable and predictable most of the time. And that is manifesting itself in little moments, little cameos, like he was the fastest guy in terms of the first flying lap of that circuit that they all were driving. You know, they were all brand new to that track, and Max was put in the quickest flying lap, as he would. And he was really good in terms of his tire management, even though he didn't have a lot of laps.
Yeah.
But I think this learning the circuit thing's a bit overrated. I mean, as Jim Clark said, if you don't know a circuit in 4 laps, you shouldn't be a Grand Prix driver. And that was going back to the days when they didn't have simulators and they didn't walk the track either. So, and Jimmy was absolutely right. If you can't learn a track in 4 laps, forget it.
That's incredible. So if we speak to the teams for a second, in the way, I'm going to get onto Mercedes a bit later because that's causing massive controversy in the community and their mishaps strategically. But do you think Red Bull are operating on ever so slightly a different level to that of Ferrari? Because they put in the time pre-race to understand the tyre deg and how they're going to bring the tyres to that very narrow.
Yeah, I do. Window. And I think part of that is Red Bull have been running at the front and winning races for a long time consistently. And I think, fairness to Ferrari, it's a while since they've been up there, just, in with a chance of a win at every race, having to race against a team like Red Bull or Mercedes when they were really good. So, as I said, it'll be interesting to see Ferrari learn from what happened in Miami, because to my eye, they did not put in the homework that Red Bull did, and they focused too much on the pole. And maybe they're just thinking of Monaco. Let's get our qualifying sorted and we'll start practicing for Monaco 2 races in advance. I don't know. But no, I'm obviously being facetious. But Charles did get the pole and Max did mess up his last Q3 lap. But then that was kind of predictable given that he hadn't done many laps on the soft tire.
Absolutely.
And so, as as I keep saying, he had the long-term focus of the race, and he was thinking at the end of the race as Friday drew to a halt, really, and he was sitting in the garage watching everybody else going around, and that was really impressive. I think Ferrari are a very good team, and they've got very good people. It's a cliche, obviously, to say that, but they're a very good team. They have been for a long time. They're very good pit work, very good starts those cars make, and that's not just mechanical stuff. That's also organization.
Yes.
And I think the biggest problem potentially is that they are a bit split. There's a sort of Charles Leclerc, which to me is, he's a class star driver. And then there's the sort of Carlos Sainz thing. And there seems to be a lot of people out there still who think Carlos is the faster, better driver and should be given a better car or whatever they think. And I think that is, a lot of people, that can be quite damaging if it's a Ferrari team you're talking about, because politics can rip a team apart quite quickly. And we've seen that in the past with Ferrari. And I just hope that doesn't happen, because there's no doubt that if they stay focused and they're reliable, which I think they will be, but they stay focused and they learn from their little errors, I think Charles can win the championship. And, he's got a very, very good chance of doing it. He's good enough driver to do it. That is
absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my friends killed me over the weekend for almost writing off Charles Leclerc and declaring very prematurely that I think Max Verstappen has kind of got him under manners just a little bit, that in his ascendancy and confidence, again, with one title behind him, I think he's
I don't think what we saw in Miami was anything to do with Charles versus Max. That was purely to do with Ferrari not giving Charles all the equipment he needed to take on Red Bull and Max Verstappen. And it's nothing to do with the drivers. I mean, in terms of the drivers, I think there's very, very little between Max and Charles and Lewis. I thought Lewis was absolutely superb in Miami, given all the stuff that we know about Lewis, 7 times world champion. He's been racing a long time now, since 2007. And for somebody to remain that motivated and to be that driven into a result like that, racing in the crud of the midfield, Yuki Tsunoda or Fernando. I'm not saying Fernando's not worth racing against, but a bit unusual for him, isn't it? And Pierre Gasly, and he's still just a pure racer. I know you want to get on to Merck, but I just had to make that point. I still think Lewis, Charles, and Max are the 3 best guys on the track at the moment. Yeah. Lando's not far away from them. Pierre's not that far away either, but those 3 are in a class of their own, and they have been for the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, Charles has been an outstanding talent, even when he was finishing 4th or 5th regularly in the Ferrari.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with that. Before we segue on to Lewis and the craziness going on there, Mercedes jewelry gate and all that good stuff. You've talked about Carlos Sainz. So I was anticipating massive things from Carlos Sainz, not least after he signed the contract, because I feel like he's a bit of a confidence driver. And if he's getting 1-year extensions as a human, it's kind of hard to feel backed by the team, right? So it's really disappointing to see that post signing the new contract, he's kind of he's become a bit of a, not Nicholas Latifi, that's too harsh to say, right? But he's had a couple of incidents and he's not hooked up. I suppose he was unlucky in Australia during qualification. I know, Peter, that you've talked about him potentially having to dial back in his steering inputs and being less aggressive, less of a rally driver, for want of a better word. What do you think Carlos needs to do to kind of fix his form and get alongside, if not in front of his teammate Charles Leclerc?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not a question of confidence, because I think, as you say, when you sign a new contract, you certainly have a surge of confidence. It's a question of technical errors in his driving. And there's nothing, everybody has technical errors. Absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying anything particularly critical of Carlos there. Everybody has errors. As Lewis, we've seen over the years, he's developed and he's improved, and he still has some. But like Sebastian Vettel, I don't think Carlos has been very self-critical of his own driving. I think he often uses phrases like, I don't feel at one with the car, or I don't know what happened. And it suddenly makes you think, you know, does this guy really feel the surface of the road? And does he really understand the difference between him and Charles Leclerc right now? Because there's nothing wrong in a guy like Carlos Sainz, or indeed Fernando Alonso when he was alongside Lewis at McLaren, saying to himself and maybe to the world, wow, Leclerc is better than me at this, and this. I think I'm better at that. I'm going to work on a couple of things. It's going to be a really interesting year for me. I mean, it's no different from a tennis player saying, I've got a great serve and volley, but I'm not really good at the ground strokes, or whatever they want to say. You know, I don't know why racing drivers have to have this thing about, I'm perfect, I need confidence, the team needs to give me the car, and then everything's going to happen. And often you hear the race engineers kind of backing that up with the sort of instructions they're giving their drivers on the radio, like, you know, brake a little bit later here, your minimum speed's a bit slow there. It's all sort of micromanagement of the driver rather than the overall picture of what he's doing with the fluidity of his movements, by which I mean the hands, obviously, and the feet. And I don't think Carlos has ever really developed as a driver technically since the Toro Rosso days. I think he's the same driver, really. I think, you know, you put him in a McLaren, Lando would beat him, as he did when he was in a McLaren, and you put him in a Ferrari, Charles Leclerc's going to beat him, as he did. And I think he's the same guy. And just getting a new contract, or being confident, or having 99% of the people think you're driver of the day, or everybody thinking you're a guy that deserves a much better chance and you're very unlucky, doesn't help you at all when it comes down to 1 second to go in Q3 and you're 0.3 off the pace, and sector 1 you're down 100th of a second to Charles Leclerc, and you've got to find another 200th of a second over the next 2 sectors. How's he going to do that? You know, all those things don't help him then. What he needs then is to be able to dig deep into a really fertile, healthy palette of talent. And I think he potentially has that from his car control, but I don't think he's allowing himself to grow in the same way Vettel didn't. You know, when Vettel got beaten by Daniel Ricciardo at Red Bull in that last year, instead of digging deep and saying, I've got a problem, I actually can't drive a car if I don't have a lot of downforce at the rear, I need to think about how I'm going to do that. He just thought, oh, I'm fed up with this. I'm going to go to Ferrari and they'll love me there. And I'm the 4 times world champion. I'm a good bloke. And that was it. He enjoyed his life. But then he got his ass kicked, you know, and because he didn't look at those details. And I think part of the problem is with the engineers, as I often say. You know, I don't think they are saying to the driver, this is what you're doing wrong, because they're a bit scared to say that to a Sebastian Vettel or a Carlos Sainz or whoever it is. You know, who are you to tell me that I'm not doing the same as Charles Leclerc? You know, there are a couple of moments when they say you can come out of the brake pedal a bit earlier, but what they don't say is the rate at which you can come out of the brake pedal, because the engineers don't actually know the rate. They can't see it on the telemetry because we're talking the gaps between the digits. Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these incredibly subtle movements, and you can see it on the car. And I said in the vid in Miami, you know, you can see it through that change of direction in the early part of the lap with Carlos. He was consistently enjoying the feel and driving off the feel of slight oversteer before he created the other change of direction. That is classic Carlos Sainz. And yet Charles was not doing that. And you could say, oh, well, Charles had less oversteer. Nothing to do with that. That is the way Charles is going through the first part of that change of direction. He's getting the car slightly straighter when he's putting on the power. And he's giving himself a slightly better place, therefore, in which to make the change of direction. And that is the difference. And it's no surprise to me that it was the left-hander after that where Carlos went off, because first time he went off, because, you know, that is a result of overloading the car. And when he had his crash, that was all to do with braking with load in the car. Which again, you know, you could say, well, LeClerc brakes with load in the car. Yeah, but LeClerc brakes with load in the car at exactly the right rate, whereas Carlos brakes like that. And that's the difference as well. Spiky or slightly less spiky.
Mr. Windsor, you're an F1 maven.
Well, I'm not. A lot of people would say, I mean, somebody wrote on my thing, you know, it's always a laugh listening to Peter talking about the driving styles. Well, you know, they can say what they like. All I will say is that I saw Nigel Mansell in a Formula 3 car at Thruxton in 1978 out the back of the circuit on the quick corner through the bumps. And I had absolutely no doubt at all at that moment that this guy was absolutely in the class of anybody I'd ever seen. And that included at that point, Jim Clark, Carlos Reutemann, obviously Nicky,
wow,
you know, James. And it was very clear to me. And I worked with Nigel all the way to winning the World Championship. And along the way, I think I learned quite a lot about how racing drivers, very, very good racing drivers, drive racing cars. I knew Ayrton Senna really well in his early days, and we talked a lot about driving. And, you know, so it goes on. So that's my background. And I say what I say because it's my opinion. People can disagree with me, but, you know, sometimes the evidence shows that I'm kind of on the right path, I think.
Oh, mate, who would disagree with that? Peter, well, my subscribers and myself, I love it when you get very technical about driving style and differentiate between drivers and what characterizes them. I think it's incredible.
But you know what? I'm not actually that technical. All I am is actually realistic. And I seem technical because I think today, more than in any other era, most of the opinion forming about drivers comes from how they look, how they dress, how they speak, how they handle themselves in press conferences, you know, all those other things, how they are on the radio, all those other things come into people's psyche and they think, oh, well, that guy's, you know, he's obviously like this, and this guy's off. They don't actually look at how they're driving and what they're doing any more than the team owners do or the engineers do. They're all sitting at the monitors in the garage. How many times do you see these guys out on the circuit actually watching their drivers driving the car? Still, to me, the most amazing thing. I mean, it's like a tennis coach watching his tennis player in the changing room, just watching the score and thinking, oh yeah, look, he's just lost a match, he's just lost a break point, that's bad, without actually watching the match.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what's going on. You could say, oh, well, they're watching the TV feed, but you know, this TV feed is telling you the angles to watch from. It's not showing you all the angles. And it's not showing you very often the right angles, because they're focused on what looks good as a picture, what looks good for the background, what looks good with atmosphere, low down. I mean, the onboard shots when they're low down on the track are a complete and utter waste of time, in my view. They may look impressive. They don't tell you anything.
Fair.
Nothing. You can learn absolutely nothing by those. I don't know why they bother with those. And I really can't get my head around the helmet cam either, because you can't see anything there. I think the much better view is just over the driver's shoulder, and that's all you need, and rear view. But all the other stuff, I mean, you can't tell anything from it.
Yeah, this goes to the circus versus circuit point, right? Peter, there's so much there to unpack. Very quickly before I move on, you talked about Nigel, Mr. Mansell. What do you think? I can hear my subscribers in my head saying, ask Peter, what do you think made Mansell so good? I've heard people talk about just these, just the feel, right? And a lot of people say this is what differentiates the good from the great F1 drivers. But for your money, what was it that made the
well, he ticked all the boxes that you need to tick if you are a great Grand Prix driver. You know, the suppleness of inputs, the ability to be able to have a structure in your mind under pressure, and therefore know that you've got therefore exercise a certain amount of brain capacity for strategy and for looking around at what's going on, because he had that very, very high level of platform on which he could drive. Very few drivers have that. So he had that from day one. And then, having got this mental capacity, to be able to think through races and think through situations. He also showed an extraordinary ability of confidence and leadership.
Wow.
And absolutely, totally convinced that he was the fastest racing driver in the world and could win 7 world championships if he was given 7 world championship winning cars from day one. And that's a very rare thing as well. And then on top of that, I was very impressed by how good he was in other sports: golf, clay pigeon shooting, snooker, darts, anything involving hand-eye coordination, balance, timing, rhythm. He was absolutely superb. And then, of course, on the other side of the coin, when we got him the job at Lotus, and he was just a van driver, driving around England, checking on the arrival of spares and making sure third-party companies were supplying it on the right time. He was just a van driver. I said to Nigel, you know, one day, hopefully, you're going to sit down next to Colin Chapman somewhere,
wow,
maybe in the canteen. And if you do, he's not going to want to know about you as a racing driver. All he's going to want to talk about is flying, because that's all Colin's really interested in. So get yourself a private pilot's license.
Did it.
And when Colin says, "Who are you?" and you start talking about the fact that you got a PPL, he'll look at you and think, "Wow, that's quite cool." So he went out and went solo in 15 hours.
Wow.
And this is, you know, that was Nigel Mansell. And again, you know, that's quite a rare, it's a rare response for people to have when I make a comment like that. But beyond that, I think it's pretty cool that he did that. And it's exactly what happened. You know, Colin bumped into him one day and they started talking about flying, and then, "Oh yeah, you're the guy, yeah." And the next thing you know, Nigel's getting a test drive in the F1 car.
Unbelievable. What a brilliant
and I was all of that. And then, you know, you get this feeling with Nigel. I always had this feeling with Nigel that, you know, if we were in the trenches, you'd want to be on Nigel Mansell's side. And I always had that feeling with him. And that's a great thing as well. And I can't describe to you the feeling of watching and being a part of Nigel's career in the very early Formula One days when he was at Lotus. Sometimes when he didn't even have a permanent driver, talking about 80 and then 81, and how on the edge it was. Everything he did could have made or broken his career at that point. And he always delivered on the very big points. And I think it's because he had such a tough upbringing, and the media and the press was so negative about Nigel at the expense of other drivers who they liked, particularly in the UK. But when it came to a big pressure point, and we're at the 80 Dutch Grand Prix, and Colin Chapman says, "Nigel's not going to qualify in the 81B. We'll put him into Elio De Angelis's car, put Nigel's tires on that. He's got one set of tires." And he gets in Elio's car, doesn't fit the cockpit. It's one set of tires, and he goes out and he's 2/10 slower than Elio, just like that. I mean, I remember I was standing behind the pits with a stopwatch, and I could look as he crossed the start-finish line. I'd be like that, and then I'd run around behind the pits, watch him come down into the Hansrug hairpin, watch that, and I had a split there, and I knew that at that moment he was right there on an Elio lap. You know, this is amazing. I remember that, you know, the feeling of exhilaration at that moment. And then he came across the line, and that lap time, you know, that was just, you know, that's what makes Formula One what it is, in my view. That little moments like that, and he was just superb under pressure, Nigel, absolutely superb. And had he been recognized as a great Grand Prix driver early in his career, as Alan Prost was, as Ayrton was, as Nelson Piquet was, as Niki Lauda, a lot of guys, I think he could have won 4 or 5 world championships. Let's face it, you know, he was in Formula One in 1980, and it wasn't until 86, really, that everybody kind of really started to take him quite seriously as a Grand Prix championship contender. So there's 5 years, you could say, of waste. Yeah. Anyway.
Jeez, I love that, Peter. Love that. I could listen to you talk about that stuff for hours. Clearly, to your mind, Mansell was an uncommon
he was one of the greats. There's no doubt. I mean, I'd love to.
Amongst uncommon men, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know Ian Scott Watson quite well, and he had a similar relationship with Jimmy Clark, and you know, those moments when Jim would get in a car and everything, the pressure was on, and he would deliver. Those are priceless moments. And you don't have it so much today, because most drivers are sort of spotted quite early on, and then they have a lot of simulation and a lot of stuff around them. and that business just getting in a car and putting the lap together on your own, it's pretty rare these days, but it does happen still.
Absolutely. Segueing nicely back to present day 2022.
Yeah.
Can't we talk about Mercedes? I'm in the throes of burning all my Mercedes caps, Peter, because the stress of being a Mercedes Sir Lewis Hamilton fan it weighs very heavily on my shoulders at the moment. So I want to get your take on, I've been analysing the difference between the information that different drivers get and how they react to it, and ultimately the outcome, which is making a good or bad strategic decision. And you saw Lewis had something to say in the post race and said that he'd wished that, listen, you're my team, you've got all the information, tell me what to do. Am I going to pit or am I not going to pit? Peter, my question to you, how twofold. Is there something that Mercedes are missing? Are we thinking lack of critical thinking? Are they a victim of the 8 championships? And then secondly, how would you handle, I think Lewis has been quite respectful of his team. I think he's handled it very well up until now. Max would jump on the radio and kill his team instantly. What the F is going on? Whatever. I think Lewis hitherto has been quite respectful. You predicted in a couple of videos back that at some point Lewis is going to lose patience with his team, and it feels like that point is in and around now. How would you handle that as a team manager, Peter? There's a lot in there for you to unpick, mate.
Well, the problem is George, of course. It's not anything more or less than that. And you've got to remember, Lewis wanted to keep Valtteri. So something big happened there over the winter in Lewis's mind. Apart from a whole Abu Dhabi thing, they didn't listen to him and they signed George. And there are a lot of good reasons to have George. He's the future. If Lewis retires, they've got the guy, he's the best, more points for the team, all the rest of it. All of them actually amount to nothing if you put them alongside Michael Schumacher's obvious evidence of how to win a championship. You don't play around, and every point counts.
Wow.
So Valtteri, in that respect, was the perfect other driver for Lewis, in the same way that Sergio Perez is the perfect other driver for Max Verstappen. Red Bull would never in a million years have thought of signing George Russell, even if he was available, and put him alongside Max Verstappen. But Mercedes did. So that's what's happened. If I was now drafted in as team principal at Mercedes, I would say, George, here's the contract. It's in 2 pieces now, mate. If you want to keep driving, no problem, but sign on the dotted line here. You will never finish in front of Lewis Hamilton. Sorry.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that because Lewis needs that protection or because George is quicker. It's because of exactly the situation we had in Miami, which I predicted. These things happen. That was nothing to do with poor strategy, because there was no way you could make a right call on Lewis's race. Once he was in that track position, you had to keep him out there. There's no question about that. So there's nothing to do with Mercedes' strategy there. But what should have happened is that there's no way George should have passed Lewis. George should have sat there behind. And I tell you something else. If you think about Peter Collins in 1956, getting out of his car and giving it to Fangio without even being asked, because he wanted Fangio to win the championship in style, and in doing so relinquished a small chance he had still of winning the championship. I wonder whether it even crossed George's mind not to pass Lewis and get on the radio and say, sorry guys, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to sit behind Lewis. It's his race. He earned it with his driving on whatever in qualifying. I'm just going to sit behind him. If he'd done that, I think it would have been pretty cool, actually. But of course, George is never going to do that. He's a racing driver. He's out for George Russell. He wants the best he can do. And of course, it's very easy for Mercedes to say, oh yeah, we got to maximize every point, every car, blah, blah, blah. But I can tell you now, because Mercedes didn't listen to Lewis and keep Valtteri, that is going to be the weak point of the whole thing. And that is where you can say it's either going to be strategy, or it's going to be the porpoising, or it's going to be this or that. Because, by the law of averages, even if they were running at the front, George is going to be winning some races as well as Lewis and beating Lewis, because he's a quick driver. Which is exactly why you wouldn't put him in a Red Bull or Ferrari wouldn't hire him, because Charles would say, no way. And so would Max. Yeah. You don't unbalance. If you got Lewis Hamilton, is the final point, you don't want George Russell in the other car. If you got George Russell, you don't want Sergio Perez, you probably want Lando Norris, but that's because they're very early stages of their career. But if you got Lewis Hamilton, 7 times world champion, you put Valtteri Bottas in, thank you very much, because this guy is a proven really good number 2 to Lewis. If you want the best from Lewis. Otherwise, you're going to annoy Lewis. And an annoyed Lewis is not going to be as effective as a focused Lewis.
I think you've nailed it there, Mr. Windsor. I suppose the only thing that I'd add is it feels like I made a video to this extent, right? It feels to me like Mercedes are now fighting a battle on a very many different fronts. So the development of the car, their pit stops are habitually slow. Strategy, I suppose at Imola, you might want to criticize them for not taking a gamble when Lewis was in 11th and had nothing to lose. Pit him surely on lap 16, lap 17 with Danny Rick, especially if he's the Regenmeister. So if I understand why Lewis is getting a bit cheesed off with the whole situation, if I'm honest. But again, I'm hoping. Do you think they can turn it around, Peter, to ultimately win a drivers' championship / constructors in 2022?
Well, I mean, of course, Lewis is cheesed off with the situation because deep down inside, he lost the drivers' championship last year for no reason whatsoever, because stupid things were done against the rule book on the last lap of the race. And I still think Mercedes should have fought that much harder than they did. I just cannot believe they just walked away from that, A. And B, I think it's as a result of that, it was a double whammy, because not only winning the constructors hurt them in terms of the aerodynamic test program, because they got less time even than Red Bull in the tunnel and in CFD, but he didn't get a drivers' championship out of it. So as I said in my video at the start of the year, it was a triple whammy for Lewis, and then they signed George. So it's all of those 3 things. I don't think Mercedes' strategy is particularly bad. And I suppose you're right that the pit stops haven't been great, but other teams have also had trouble, and we are switching to 18-inch wheels. Maybe they're not as slick as Red Bull, but let's face it, the boys have probably had a lot more workload than most of them. I don't think those things are major issues. To me, the issues are having George was always going to be a problem for the balance of the team, not necessarily for Lewis, because we saw how well Lewis still drives. I mean, he's just beautiful to watch in Miami. But for the balance of the team, it's a difficult thing. And obviously, the car is uncompetitive. And that's the biggest problem of all. And if you look at Ferrari, how they've solved the porpoising problem very early on, if you look at how McLaren got on top of it very quickly, and if you look at how obviously Red Bull got on top of it, Mercedes, what are they doing? All these committees they've got, and all these different divisions of the team, and they can't find that compromise, the compromise between enough downforce and porpoising. It's unbelievable, actually.
Analysis by analysis, Peter. I've been banging that drum for a while now. Let me, as we round third, Peter, again, you've been super generous with your time. Let me ask you a few quicker fire questions. So I think you've already answered this prediction. Can anybody get close to Max? I think you're saying Charles is potentially the
I mean, Charles can win a championship, definitely. But Ferrari have got to up their game, and they've got to be on top of this tyre situation a lot more and do a lot more homework.
Absolutely. And then Alex Albon,
yeah,
how good has he been season to date, and how good do you think he can be in 2022 and beyond?
Alex, always been a fan of Alex's, and very pleased now that he's finally doing some days with Rob Wilson, which is something that certainly I've been behind the scenes trying to encourage for the last 2 or 3 years, 4 years. And he's done that. And you can see the development of his driving as a result. And that's good to see. I mean, I think he's really good. If I was Alex, I'd just be making my bed at Williams and staying put, really, because I mean, something else might come along, but the team's starting to look pretty good, and the car's not bad. And I'd be trying to keep Nicholas Latifi in the other car as well, because it's a nice situation for Alex to have, a driver like that in the other car.
Absolutely, risk-free learning. And then talk to Danny Rick's predicament very quickly.
Well,
is this the final lap of Danny Rick's career potentially if he can't nail his teammate Lando?
Well, the writing was on the wall, of course, when he left Red Bull, because they all wanted to keep him. They have no doubt about that. And in the same way, Williams wanted to keep Damon Hill when he left. It's just that they didn't pay him the money that he thought it was worth. But they wanted to keep Daniel big time. And Daniel chose to leave 99% because he didn't like getting beaten by Max Verstappen, and 1% because Renault were paying quite a lot of money and it was a new team, fresh start, blah, blah, blah. And so that was the moment when basically Daniel Ricciardo, without having won a world championship, decided to leave a world championship winning team. And world championship winning teams are very, very difficult to drive for, to get a drive with. Very difficult. You know, 1 million drivers never get to drive for a world championship winning team. Nigel Mansell didn't drive for a world championship winning team for 5 years of his career. And there's Daniel walking out of one. Because had he stayed at Red Bull, yeah, Max probably would have won the championship last year. Well, I don't know, probably would have. Well, it would have gone the same way, maybe. But for sure, Daniel would have won races, and he would be winning races now, I think. He'd be right up there. And because he's quicker than Perez, for sure.
Absolutely.
And that's what he walked away from. And when you do that, I think it kind of eats away at who you are as a racing driver. And I think then also the problem was that when Daniel started to get beaten at McLaren by Lando, he didn't have the ability to be very self-critical because he's Daniel Ricciardo Grand Prix winner.
Absolutely.
And Lando Norris is not a Grand Prix winner. So what could he possibly learn from Lando Norris? And it's, you know, it's a little bit like the Fernando Lewis situation at McLaren. If Daniel was saying to himself, well, he probably is behind the scenes now, but I'm not sure because if you listen to the way his engineer talks to Daniel, it's all about, you know, where they're braking, where they're putting the power on. It's all this digital micromanagement of his lap, and they're losing. Daniel, as a result, is losing the field just to be Daniel Ricciardo, which is a guy who's great on cold tires, great on the first lap, always goes for the gap, and you know can bring a bad car home in a nice way. Maybe not as quick as a Max or a Lando or a Charles or a Lewis on one lap, but he's a lot of other things. But we're not seeing that now because he diluted it all by leaving Red Bull, and that has eaten away inside him. You know, he's a happy guy. He's a good guy. He's got lots of money in the bank, I'm sure. Lovely guy. But it's a shame because I don't think he should ever have left Red Bull, and that's where it's gone wrong for him.
Oh, Peter, what a shame. Absolutely a shame. And
well,
final question.
As we saw at Monza last year, he can luck into a win.
He's incredible.
It's really
on his
good,
day. Yeah,
but he's nothing like the driver on one lap as Lando Norris. If you look at the inputs of Lando compared with Daniel now, it's just no comparison, really. It's just fabulous to watch Lando.
He's incredible. And lastly, Peter, before I let you go, on the latest video that you've got up about Max and pressure, your pseudo Miami Grand Prix review, it's not lost on me that at the very end, there is I'm going to try not to cry here, Peter. There is a very fitting dedication to Gilles Villeneuve, circa 40 years after his death.
Yeah.
When you talk about, in fact, you can probably talk to it better than me, Peter, where you talk about it's probably the first, he took a picture with your camera, right?
He did,
you say it's probably the first selfie. Talk to me very quickly about what Gilles meant to you and maybe reflect on the very famous Battle French Grand Prix with René.
Yeah, Gilles was, well, we were basically the same age. And so we always shared one another's birthdays for a start. And so that was a bond. And I knew him, obviously, when he was in Formula Atlantic. I knew of him and got to talk to him a bit when he did that race at Silverstone in 77 in the McLaren. And then because I was basically managing Carlos Reutemann at the time, and Carlos was in the Ferrari, when Nicky walked out of the team in Canada, Gilles got the drive. And so Gilles and I became friends quite quickly. And I suppose the first time I really got to know him was in South Africa, 78. And I remember chatting to him in the lobby for about an hour and a half about Formula Atlantic, Can-Am, what it's like to hit a wall and not slow on exit without slowing the car, but using the wall to keep you on the track, which is what he was able to do for lap after lap after lap in Formula Atlantic. And it was just like talking to this living, breathing, eating Formula One racing driver machine. And Carlos got to know Gilles very quickly as well and liked him a lot, and Gilles liked Carlos. And so we became very good friends, all of us actually. And Carlos was very much in that as well. And we always had a laugh, and he was just always doing great things with road cars, and it was incredibly, I mean, he was, if you think of Paolo Scaramelli, his number one was a very good cyclist and very fit, and Gilles was into that, and they were really good friends. And I got to know Paolo really well, and Antonio Tomaini, his race engineer, was a good friend as well. Pierre de Pasquier from Michelin we're all in a big group, and it was like something it's very difficult to describe now, I suppose. You know, there's nothing like it really today. I don't think you could create something like that. But he was, it's easy to say it, but he was not only he was a very, very good racing driver, he was a very good friend, almost as close to me as a brother. And, you know, I spent quite a lot of moments with him away from the racetrack, which I'll always treasure. And he was nothing but fun, really. I mean, all the time, it was something fun going on. And he wasn't silly. He was just doing funny things with road cars mainly, and other wild things. And, you know, we had Fiat 124 Spiders in common and coupes, and we had a love of music, and we liked the same sort of music as well. I mean, there was a lot of things. And Gilles was just a great guy, lovely guy. Lovely, lovely guy. I really miss him. And I've really missed him every year since he passed. And not every year, every day. There hasn't been a day gone past when I haven't thought about him and missed him.
Oh, mate, fitting tribute. What an absolute legend. And make sure you guys go and check out that video, the latest upload on Peter Windsor's absolutely incredible market-leading F1 YouTube channel, by the way.
It's very kind of you to say that.
Peter would never accept the praise since he's the embodiment of humility. But I'm
congrats on what you're doing too, because you know you're a passionate guy, and I can feel that, and that's a lovely thing to have. I think as long as you're doing something because you enjoy it and you're passionate about it, it'll always go reasonably well, you know, well enough to be happy. And that's the key thing, you know.
I appreciate that. So that means a lot coming from you. Thank you again for your time, Peter. We're going to have to get you back on the channel at some point. Otherwise, my subscribers will kill you. Check out the Twitter handle of Peter Windsor. Of course, you guys will know this already, at Peter D. Windsor.
I'm starting to do a bit more Insta and Face. I don't know. I can't get my head around Facebook. Never have been able to. I'll try and do a bit more Facebook. But I'm starting to put a few pictures up on Insta as well. And I've got a few interesting projects, not really which I can talk about now, which I think people are going to love, coming along soon. And I'm sort of teasing those a little bit. So
fantastic.
Yeah, quite a lot going on.
Brilliant. Well, all of Peter's social handles will be in the description. Like, comment, subscribe. Thank you again for the time, sir. I
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Brilliant
Thanks
stories,
for having
as
me.
always.
Appreciate it.